That's what I'm talking about, my friends. That is what we do here. We consciously choose and speak the word, and behold, it is done. No doubt, no feebleness in it. There's a powerfulness in the spoken word that is spoken from a place of connection. You don't need to do it alone. You don't do it disconnected. We do it once we pause and we join with the heart and mind of God and become willing and committed to think the thoughts of God, to begin to shift, and we've talked about this before, from that old BS system, that old belief system, and we're evolving our consciousness here right now to become beholders of spirit. It's a new BS system. Beholders of spirit. I thought that up this week. Beholders of spirit. You're the boss. BOS. Beholders of spirit. Beholders of the light. This is our evolution in our teaching, in our consciousness. We don't need to work the word. We need to allow the word. We need to behold the light that is within each of us. Guess what? It's already there. And the system that would say that it's not, and that would be hoodwinking us into believing in limitation and lack, we say no more. We speak a different word. And it's up to each and every one of us. We're in this, we're still reimagining, my friends. We're still reimagining who we are, what we are, how we serve. We're still reimagining unity and unity renaissance. And we are engaging a thing called the 4 agreements during the next 5 weeks. I know there's 4 agreements, but there's a lot at the beginning and a lot at the end. And so I'm going to cover the prelude to the dream and the prelude to a new dream. And then Reverend Ann's going to pick up next week with the power of our word, to be impeccable with our word. But you know, any good system, and unfortunately, this is not on, but now it is. I'm so smart. I mean, I figured it out. I hope. Did I? No? All right, friends. Sandy, if we could just go to the first slide. This is perfect. By the time Lily gets back, I can unpack that. The goal belongs at the beginning. Does it not? This is actually from A Course in Miracles that talks about the goal of awakening from a dream. That goal belongs at the beginning. Now, we get this. We do get this because none of us, takes out our phone and gets to our maps without putting the goal of where our destination is. And so our destination is, okay, I'm done unpacking that. The next slide. The goal of our destination, we speak it every Sunday. It's a spiritually awakened world living in peace, love, and joy. Now, I keep bringing up our vision, and I keep bringing it up for a reason, because I think it must be alive in us. And it's not unusual for a new minister to come to a community and to begin the process of calling forth a new vision. But what I firmly believe in is if you got a good vision, stick with it. This is a great vision, and it's part of what attracted me here. But the other piece of it is that we will naturally attract a new vision that will pull us forward when we really get that this is complete, when we really embody it within our lives. And what I want us to do as a community is to begin to acknowledge ourselves for our present spiritual awakening. That it's not something that's in the future, it's happening now. We are it now. And how do we recognize it? We recognize it, my friends, every time we choose peace. I know you choose peace throughout your day. Every time you choose peace, every time you choose to be harmonious, every time you let go of a need to be right is a moment when you choose peace. Acknowledge yourself for that. Write it in your journal. Give yourself an atta-girl and an atta-boy at the beginning or the end of the day. Like, begin to cultivate the recognition that you are already living a spiritually awakened life. And then the next time that you choose love instead of something unlike love, I invite you to acknowledge yourself. I invite you, because you can do that here. You can say, you can lean over and say, hey, you know what? I chose to be kind and loving. Right out there in that narthex. Right? You don't have to look far for the moments that you're demonstrating that you are spiritually awake. Or the joyfulness that we feel, like when we're with one another, or when we see a child's face, or when we behold with awe the beauty of the world. Begin to take note of all of those moments where you're already doing this. And guess what? What we focus on increases. And soon, the way that maybe you might have reacted becomes something from the distance, becomes an aspect of yourself that you barely recognize anymore. And when she pops up or he pops up, you love them. You love that aspect of yourself, because we're ever only practicing this with how we also regard ourselves. So the goal belongs at the beginning. We do this also with how we transform lives, by transforming the world. But you know what? Our transformation begins with us. So every time you realize, oh my goodness gracious, as the song said, a shift's already occurred. I keep speaking the word, and guess what? Shifts are occurring. We have a group of people that are about, by next Sunday, those who practice every day, have done a 40-day prosperity program. And I got to tell you, there are shifts happening in their lives, because every day they're taking a I'm doing it too, we're taking a spiritual principle that God is my lavish source and supply, and that it's individualized as me. Guess what? It's the reality of me. That God is my only source, substance, and supply, so I don't need to look anywhere else. These are all ways that then we begin to send out those ripples, and guess what? They come back to us, and we're made new, we're transformed. We believe what we're speaking here because we're proving it in our lives. The goal belongs at the beginning. And that's what we do whenever we come here together. So then, oh, look, it works. So then the invitation is that as we do this, we add something to our practice. This is another way of looking at the same spiritual principles and truth. You guys are familiar with this book. Most of you are, aren't you? And I got to tell you, every time I read it, it reveals itself in a new way to me, in a magnificent way. And so all I'm covering is really before the very first agreement. I'm just going to cover a couple pages in the beginning here. But what it's about is the Toltec teaching is an ancient wisdom that has its cornerstone in esoteric spiritual principles and truth. And as I read it, I realize just like unity teaching and principles. So there are many pathways, and this becomes a pathway also, but it's consistent with our pathway. And it gives us another way to look at it and another way to practice the same principles of truth. And so this Toltec teaching, like many wisdom teachings, because of the politics of the day, ends up going underground. Not unlike what happened in this area with the feminine intelligence and wisdom and connectedness with Mother Earth and that divine intuition. They ended up calling these people witches and ended up drowning them and burning them. And so that wisdom goes under the surface. But it's still alive. You cannot snuff it out. And that's the same thing that happened with the Toltec teaching, which was in Mexico. And so the author of our book, Don Miguel Ruiz, comes from a certain lineage of masters of this teaching. And he shares it with us in such a very clear and concise way. And so why did I begin with the goal belongs in the beginning? Why did I begin with our spiritual vision of spiritually awakening? Because the whole premise of this part that leads to the way to the new agreements is that we are asleep. And does not our visioning that says we are spiritually awakened, does it not imply we were once asleep? And so from that perspective, we are all in these teachings that are awakening us from a dream of sleeping. And even our reading that Anne read talked about, but when we wake up, we can choose again. But what Don Miguel Ruiz is saying is that, no, we're always dreaming. We're dreaming asleep, and we dream awake. A Course in Miracles does the same thing. It says we're always dreaming. The mind is always contriving stories and making up things and attaching to beliefs. And so in this experience, what we do is we can continue the dream of being asleep, or we can dream the dream of being awake. Dream the dream of a happy dreamer, a person who anchors that love, that peace, that joy. And so this Toltec teaching, very similar to our teaching, it says while it does embrace spirit, it is most accurately described as a way of life. And it's distinguished by the ready accessibility of happiness and love. Like, what that means is we don't need to go find happiness and love. It's all already here. It's all already here. I remember, a couple months ago, Reverend Ann was sharing something that Reverend Elizabeth, one of our previous ministers, said, and it had to do with faith. And Elizabeth said to her, "You will never have more faith than you have right now. You will never have more love or more happiness than you have right now. Are you aware of it? Are you focused on it? Are you partaking of it? Are you speaking the words that affirm it?" And so in unity, we deny the dream of illusion, of lack, of limitation, and we affirm something new. We affirm thoughts of God. We affirm God as our source and supply. And in this teaching, what he's saying is that every time we attach to a belief system, it's an agreement we make. And so what must we do? We must choose our new agreements. And that's what the 4 agreements is about. In letting go of the dream, we begin to release old agreements of beliefs, and we take on new ones. And the 4 agreements in particular are ways of behavior that keep us aligned in a new way. That as we practice, as it becomes a pathway of practice, we begin a new dream. A dream of that happiness, of that love that is ever accessible, ever available to us. take a breath with me here. The book actually starts out with a story of a young student in this way of this teaching. And he tells a story where he knows he's asleep. He's having a lucid dream. And he can tell that he's dreaming. He can actually have that distance. He can see his body. He can see himself acting out the dream, but he's awake and aware. And what comes to him as this is happening is he has this realization that he is like a star of light, a star in the sky. And as he looks at the star, he contemplates and realizes that the star is not the source of light, but there's something back of the star that is illuminating the star, that is the source of light. And that he realizes that what appears to be darkness in between the stars that are illuminated is this allness that's creating everything. And he goes on to describe, though, the dream that we are in. When we're not in the lucid dream having these realizations, we begin to perceive each other, and that there becomes a cloudedness, a fogginess, a smokiness. And we can't see ourselves clearly, nor can we see one another clearly. And it reminds me of so he says, everything in existence is a manifestation of the one living being, God. Does that sound like unity? I think it totally sounds like unity. And that the human perception is merely light perceiving light. And that matter is a mirror. So everything that is in form is really a projection of our own thoughts, of our own thinking. And he goes on to say that the world of illusions, the dream, is just like smoke, which doesn't allow us to see what we really are. And that the real us is pure love, pure light. Now, that sounds really similar to something that we see in Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. This was always one of my favorite scriptures, that as I became aware that I was dreaming a dream, and that I would hear ministers like myself say this, it is as if we are looking through a glass darkly, a smoky mirror, and we can't see. But may I call forth that moment when I go into, I pause, I take that breath, and I go into that consciousness that I may see face to face. May I see you face to face, each and every one of us, looking at one another and becoming beholders of the light that we are. Then we see face to face. Take a breath with me there. When I was a little girl, and I started to tell a story about my backyard last week. So it's the same backyard. It's a yard on a hill, the only hill in Toledo, Ohio. And so therefore, in the wintertime, it was the only hill that we could go sledding on. And it was so cool because my house was on the edge of this hill, and we could look out the window, and all the kids would be sledding down that hill. And You know how it is in the wintertime at night. The sky is so clear, crisp and clear, and you can see the stars. And there was a memory that I have imprinted within my soul of my dad and I sometime around Christmas time, laying on the side of that hill, looking up. He was probably exhausted, because I had him going up and down the hill, sledding. And we're laying down and we're looking up and we sing Silent Night together. And it just brought me so much joy and happiness. And when I share it with you, it's like I'm right there. But there were other times when he wasn't there. And I remember looking up and wondering and pondering about the stars. You see, I was the youngest of 4 girls. And by the time I came along, Mom and Dad were a little tired. They didn't take as many pictures. And I remember around that time thinking, I think I'm adopted. And they didn't tell me. And I remember kind of being upset about it, like, where are all the pictures of me? And I can see all my sisters, tons of pictures, and their little books are completed, first this, first that, but not mine. I'm like, what's up with that? And so even though I'm the spitting image of my dad, I look exactly like my dad, I still thought, well, I don't know what happened, but I don't think I belong in this family. Anybody ever feel that way about your family? And I remember looking up at the stars and having the same thought that is in the early story, and I made a decision that that's my family. That's what I'm of. I'm of that light. I am celestial. Later I added all these words, but I remember identifying with the star in the sky, thinking that was where I came from. And little did I know that there was some truth to that. And so here we are, and we're talking about spiritual awakening all the time, and what does that mean? But then the question becomes, well, how did we fall asleep? How did we fall asleep? What happened there? And then this is where this book has always made such an impression. It was the first place I ever heard about the domestication of a human being. A domestication of a human being. I didn't like that. I didn't like that. Who wants to be domesticated? I want to be wild and free. Don't you? Yeah, doesn't it feel like that's what we're meant to be? So as I was preparing for this message, I thought, well, what does it really mean to domesticate a thing? It isn't pretty. It's a process to domesticate an animal. It actually takes generations of taking it out of its natural environment and social structure. There's social structure in animal families. And you remove them. There's violence in this. I don't mean to be a bummer, but it's true. If we're going to use the word domestication of humans, let's look at how we domesticate animals, or how we break a wild horse. You bridle them. You ride them. You have the reins real tight. We break the beaks off of chickens. We take the young of cows. It's a violent process that interrupts the natural behavior of that species. And it does it in a violent, harmful way. Now, this is where I pause and take a breath here. We just finished Unity introduction, and Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were dedicated to harmlessness, which is why they were vegetarian. Now, this is not a pitch on vegetarianism for you, but I'm making a point here that it's important for us to open our eyes to anywhere where we're practicing a harmfulness in life. And so the Fillmores and Charles is attributed with this statement: as long as we kill animals, there will be no peace on earth. And unity, if we're going to say we're unity, was a vegetarian. That was one of the belief systems that we had. And that went away with organizational structures, and it probably wasn't popular, for people. But the domestication of animals, and what Don Miguel Ruiz is saying, is the domestication of humans. And it takes generation after generation, and it squashes our natural freedom and our instincts. Now, I'm not sharing this with us in a way so that we judge one another, but it's just to open our eyes. Because I know my mom and dad conditioned me in certain ways. I know they did. And it was part of probably the domestication they had. And they told me that in order to be safe in this world, I had to proceed in a certain way. So these are good human beings, right, who just want their kids to be safe. And so you have to behave, you have to act a certain way, you have to almost squash that spark of the divine that you are in order to get by in this world. I remember wanting to study liberal arts, and I remember my dad saying, "But can you make money doing that?" And so he corralled me, kind of squashed that desire out of the goodness of his heart, because he wanted his little girl to be okay in the world that might not recognize her free way of being in a way where she could survive in the world. And so I went to business school. And it comes in handy. However, little did I know, this is what I wanted to do, right? And it took me a long time to get here. I think that the energy it takes to squash and control so strenuous. We're seeing through a glass darkly, and my beloveds, it's painful. And it's why we have projected a world that we see right now. And any of you watching any of the news, just for a minute, it's not a pretty sight always. There is a new way of being. There is an old way of being that got squashed and covered up and had to go under the current. And today, I can do what I do. I am fearful right now that that may not be true in a year or two. I do feel that something is going on in our culture, in our world, that's trying to exert a different dream that I don't want to partake of. And so, part of being spiritually awake is to have the courage. This takes courage to shift. It takes courage to make new agreements. It takes courage to let go of old agreements, of limitation, of lack of fear. But there is no safety in that. There is no safety in it. So take a breath with me. This is from Don Miguel Ruiz again. He went around in his little awakening the story of the student. And he realized, but if God is everything, I am God too. And that you are all God. Now I remember when I first came here, we did this little introduction where we introduced ourselves. Hello. We all got up. Hello. I'm René, and you told me your name. And then we said, René Christ. And then we said, Christ. Hello, I'm Christ. And then we said, hello, I'm God. Oh, blasphemy. Right? But this is what has been told. Do you not know ye are gods in the making? And that's what we are. We're a chip off the old block. So we are the same, you and I. We are images of light. We are God. And that's what these agreements help us to remember. This is what unity teaching helps us to remember. And I think we've done enough for today. And so take a breath with me here. As we turn within,